Tonight, the death of an American icon. Former Secretary of State Colin Powell, fully vaccinated, has died from COVID complications. Remembering the four-star general who broke ground as the first black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and America's top diplomat. Plus, kidnapped in Haiti. 17 Christian missionaries, men, women, and children, nearly all of them American.
U.S. officials now are working on shore around the clock.
And
God is not a Republican, that God loves everybody.
CBN founder Pat Robertson on God, politics, and heaven. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder. Tonight, 17 Christian missionaries remain kidnapped in Haiti, nearly all of them Americans. We will have more on that in just a moment. But first, remembering an American great. After 4 decades of public service and breaking barriers, military hero, former Secretary of State and Joint Chiefs Chairman Colin Powell has died at the age of 84. The beloved leader made history as the first black man to hold those positions. Powell reportedly suffered from a form of cancer, but his death was due to complications from COVID-19. Tributes have been pouring in all day from people across the political spectrum, and tonight the White House has ordered all U.S. flags to fly at half-staff. CBN's Tara Mergener leads us off. Tara?
Jenna, Colin Powell spent his adult life serving his country with 35 years in the military and as trusted advisor to each American president from Ronald Reagan until George W. Bush. The U.S. Defense Secretary saying Colin Powell's passing is like a hole in his heart.
The world lost one of the greatest leaders that we have ever witnessed.
Though fully vaccinated, his family announcing he died from COVID complications.
There are extremely rare cases of deaths or hospitalizations among fully vaccinated individuals. That has been the case even before the death of Colin Powell.
There are also reports he'd been diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a type of blood cancer that weakens the body's ability to protect against infections. In a statement, the Powell family remembering him as a remarkable and loving husband, father, grandfather, and a great American. The son of Jamaican parents, Powell's life started in Harlem, later graduating from City College of New York and joining the Army through ROTC. He completed 2 decorated combat tours in Vietnam, rose to National Security Advisor for President Ronald Reagan, and eventually served under 4 presidents.
Colin L. Powell, the 65th Secretary of State.
Including President George W. Bush.
General Powell is an American hero, an American example, and a great American story.
Who, after learning of Powell's death, wrote, "Laura and I are deeply saddened by the death of Colin Powell. He was a great public servant." Along with his service came controversy following this 2003 United Nations speech defending the U.S. invasion of Iraq.
There can be no doubt that Saddam Hussein has biological weapons.
While those weapons were never found, Powell maintained it was an intelligence failure and insisted the decision was the right one. Once part of the GOP, Powell twice endorsed Barack Obama. Then after the deadly January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, he said he no longer considered himself a Republican.
And right now, I'm just watching my country and not concerned with parties.
Highly regarded by political leaders worldwide.
His experience, his patriotism. He gave us his decency.
He also twice received the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Powell leaves behind his wife of 48 years, Alma Powell, and his son, Michael. He was 84. Jenna.
All right, Tara, thank you very much. And here with us now is Michael OHanlon, Senior Fellow and Director of Research and Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Michael, it's great to have you with us this evening. I want to start just by talking about how you knew Colin Powell. Tell us about your relationship and also your reaction to his passing.
Well, like a lot of people, I'm real sad, Jenna. I don't say that I knew him well, but I was lucky to have crossed paths a couple of times. And what was striking to me was that he remembered me. He went out of his way to say nice things, to refer to our previous conversations, or indicated that he knew what I had been up to. And you know, he didn't have to say that. He's a legend. He's a lion. He's just one of the greats of all time. But I think that was reflective of the way that he would take care of certainly his soldiers when he was in positions of command, and just try to nurture and support people in general, and always with the independent streak politically that you mentioned, but also always with an endeavor to do the right thing. A very principle-based person who he was around long enough he was going to make a mistake or two, but he got a lot of things right, and he was always trying to do the ethical thing. I really admired the man.
Yeah, we're looking at photos of him here with people on all walks of the political spectrum, Democrats, Republicans. He served in 4 administrations. You know, Michael, people have talked about his outstanding character, and while he had great strength, he also had humility. Talk about his attitude and his approach in his, the 4 administrations that he served in.
Well, you're right, Jenna. It is tough to, I mean, he had a commanding presence. This was not a shrinking violet, and you know that, and I know that. Everybody who saw him knows that. But at the same time, he was not arrogant or vain. At least I always was struck by how much, when I would encounter him, he wanted to talk, as equals in effect. And when he was taking briefings, he had a reputation for being thoughtful, listening well, taking in information. He knew that the decisions he was being asked to contribute to were difficult and very important. People's lives were on the line. And so he didn't have a lot of time for just putting his ego out there or worrying about getting credit. And he was a team player, and as you say, he did this through multiple administrations, multiple stages in his career. And he began in Vietnam, which you mentioned at the beginning of the package, but it's worth remembering because the Vietnam War was so difficult. The military was not in great condition in Vietnam. He really came up through the ranks in that period of time. He was hurt twice in Vietnam. He understood what it meant to send a military to a war that wasn't well defined, and when the military itself was not well resourced. And I think he resolved from that point onward never to be part of decisions, or at least never to support decisions that would repeat any of those Vietnam-era mistakes. Of course, he had some controversy around him, and you alluded to that as well. But I don't think you're going to go through the career that he did and not get involved in some pretty difficult decisions.
Right. Michael, there is the controversy. There's there's so many stories from people about this man, this giant of American history. How do you think history will remember Colin Powell?
I think very well. Even people who don't think the Bush administration handled the decision on going to war in Iraq very well. Obviously, Colin Powell was not the main perpetrator of that way of thinking. He was trying to slow it down and challenge it within the administration, and we know that from multiple accounts. So even if he gave that UN presentation that he had some regrets about later on, he was not the main reason why, in some people's minds, we rushed to war. There were other debates that were controversial. He was reluctant to support the idea of gays openly serving in the military, and that became a controversial position at the end of his uniformed career. He went through a lot of different tough calls, but I think he'll be best remembered for being part of the rebuilding of the American military after Vietnam, and ultimately its success in the first Bush administration in Operation Desert Storm when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs. I think for me, those accomplishments are the most indicative of who he was and what his career saw him accomplish. But I also like the independence of thinking, where he would support Barack Obama, even though he was a Republican. He would criticize Donald Trump, even though he was a Republican. Right. And I think he had an integrity about him and an independence as well.
Right. Michael OHanlon, we have to leave it there. I wish we could talk more, but it's great to get your insights from someone who knew him and had such admiration for him. Michael OHanlon with Brookings Institution, thank you.
Thank you, Jenna.
And now to our other top story, and the urgent crisis unfolding in Haiti. A desperate search is underway for 17 missionaries kidnapped and taken hostage over the weekend. For Christians, the effort starts with prayer, but it could include a ransom. CBN News correspondent Brody Carter is following this story. And Brody, I know you've spoken with some Christians serving there and the growing dangers they're facing. What can you tell us?
Well, Jenna, first off, missionaries that I spoke to say this is a warning for the church right here in America, that real suffering is coming. And they add it can be identified when the enemy comes to kill, steal, and destroy.
We request urgent prayer for the group of Christian Aid Ministries workers who were abducted while on a trip to visit an orphanage on Saturday, October 16.
Christian Aid Ministries is calling on all prayer warriors after 17 of their missionaries were kidnapped at gunpoint. 16 Americans and 1 Canadian, including 5 men, 7 women, and the youngest of 5 children, just 2 years old.
They're basically going for the money, and Americans have got the money, and so they are doing this for money. They probably won't harm these individuals. They may beat them up.
The missionaries were snatched by the notorious 400 Mawazo gang. So far, no demand for ransom. The apparent targeting of American church groups has sounded alarm bells for other missionaries like Dr. David Vanderpool.
They tried to kidnap my wife at one point. Our base manager was murdered at our front gate, and then we also had 2 other team members who were kidnapped and tortured for 4 days.
Dr. Vanderpool says criminals rule the streets, with gang violence rising amid economic turmoil, deadly hurricanes, and the political disarray following the assassination of President Jovenel Moise.
Kidnappings have been up 300% month over month, so they're mostly Haitians who are kidnapped. This particular kidnapping is especially worrisome for aid workers since now we're being targeted.
The White House and State Department say they're working with Haitian leaders to locate and bring back those missionaries, saying, quote, the welfare and safety of the U.S. citizens abroad is one of the highest priorities of the Department of State. Meantime, church leaders are putting their faith in God to bring home the abducted.
These gangs are just following the enemy's, playbook, and we need them to follow the Lord's playbook. Prayer is the answer, and so, God is in complete control, even though it appears to be it's utter chaos, for mankind.
Christian Aid Ministries was founded in 1981 as a conservative Anabaptist group, and they supply Bibles across the globe. They preach the gospel, they build houses, and they help those who are in desperate need. You can learn more by heading to cbn.com. Unfortunately, when we asked them to make a comment, they did not respond. I'm Brody Carter with CBN News.
All right, Brody, thank you. And CBN News contributor Chuck Holton joins us now for more. Chuck, good to see you. Over the summer, we saw the assassination of the Haitian president, gang violence rampant there. Talk to us about what the atmosphere is like on the ground in Haiti today.
Well, Jenna, I think you have to ask yourself, what constitutes a failed state? At this point, Haiti doesn't really have any functional government in that they don't have control. There are many gangs throughout the country who are in control of the streets. They're fighting for control of various areas. And so it's become of kind of a feudal warlord system than an actual government in Haiti. And that's a real problem. Haiti has had many problems for many years. It's the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere and is about as close to Somalia as you can get in this part of the world. But in reality, the only thing that will change this is for the people's hearts to change. And that's why these missionaries are there, because they're trying to change the hearts of the people.
Chuck, do you think a situation like this discourages more missionaries from going?
Well, I know that a lot of missionaries are having to sort of reevaluate how they do business in Haiti. I personally support a family member who's been a missionary there for many years, and they almost have to live like spies now. They have to watch, not to use the same route when they come back from a place that they go to. They have to be careful to vary their schedule so that they won't get kidnapped along the way. Kidnapping is really the only growth industry in Haiti right now. And unfortunately, missionaries don't get a pass. If you come from the United States, they know that you're more able to pay ransom than a lot of Haitians would be. And in reality, hundreds of people get kidnapped in Haiti every year, and that includes more than 100 Westerners, or, we'd say people from United States, Canada, and places like that. And it doesn't usually get a lot of news simply because the more news that these kinds of events get, the more they happen.
Yeah. Chuck, how is this reconciled? How do you see this ending?
I mean, you know, a lot of people in Haiti are asking for outside help and support, but in reality, the United States has essentially purchased that country 4 times over since the first time that I went there in 1987. And I can tell you that it's 10 times worse today after billions and billions and billions of dollars having been poured into that country than it was, you know, 30, 40 years ago. And so money is definitely not the answer. I think, as I was saying, the missionaries are saying the only thing that will change this thing for good is to change the hearts of the people. And the only thing that usually will change the hearts of the people is going through some serious hardship so that they have to cry out to God. And that's what I'm hearing from the missionaries on the ground, is that people there are really starting to cry out to God. They had a 3-day protest against kidnapping here recently. So we know that's a big issue.
All right, Chuck Holton, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. And we'll be right back. Welcome back. The Biden administration is officially asking the Supreme Court to halt the Texas law that bans most abortions in the state. Today, the DOJ asking the High Court to lift an order from a conservative federal appeals court. That appeals court ruling that Texas can continue to enforce the law. It is highly controversial in large part because it puts enforcement in the hands of private citizens who are encouraged to sue anyone who assists in ending a pregnancy further along than 6 weeks. The Supreme Court already allowed Texas, the abortion law there, the restrictions to take effect in September. Tonight, jury selection is underway as 3 men prepare to stand trial for the shooting death of an unarmed black man jogging near his home in Georgia. Father and son Travis and Gregory McMichael and another neighbor, William Bryan, face state charges including murder, false imprisonment, and aggravated assault. The men are accused of chasing Ahmaud Arbery in pickup trucks, resulting in a fatal shooting in 2019. Investigators say the father-son duo went after Arbery while he was out on a jog. The McMichaels claim they thought Arbery was a neighborhood burglar, and when they caught up to him, the video shows Travis firing 3 shots, the last during a struggle with the jogger before he collapses. In a CBN News exclusive interview last year, Arbery's mother told CBN News she wishes she could ask the elder McMichael one question.
What did you guys discuss at the dinner table when he was a child? What did you guys talk about? Was it love thy neighbor? Was it any type of love? Because you failed him. You failed him. The Bible speaks of evildoers, and they just were evildoers. I want them to go to jail forever. They need to pay for what they've done.
And the trial is set to begin in February. When we come back, the Great Resignation. Which state wins in helping career switchers choose a new home? They are calling it the Great Resignation, the U.S. undergoing a record quitting spree amid the pandemic. 4 million people leaving their jobs in April and another 4 million in June. Almost 50% of American workers say the pandemic has led them to reevaluate their job choice. And as workers move on to new careers and new homes, a new study rates Georgia as the best state to change their careers, the Peach State besting the rest in a ranking of all 50 states from bestcolleges.com. And Jessica Bryant with bestcolleges.com joins us now to break down the results. Jessica, welcome. So why Georgia?
So good evening, Jenna. Thank you so much for having me. Georgia really stood out among the states because of its very low cost of living. And we found that not just Georgia, but all the states to rank really high on our list seem to have either very low cost of living or very low unemployment rates and decent job growth rate. What it's showing is that people really should be moving to the states that show a lot of promise for their future.
You went into it a little bit, but how did Best Colleges go about this process of ranking the states? You mentioned, a few of the factors.
Yeah, absolutely. So we looked at 7 different metrics for this study, including median income, cost of living, job growth rate, unemployment rate, gender pay gap, well-being, and vaccination rate. And we weighted each one of those differently by which ones we determined might be most important for someone looking to relocate. And median income and cost of living were the top priority with weighting, because after speaking with experts and discussing amongst our team, we just realized that it's very important for individuals to know that they can afford the new place they might want to travel to.
Right, right. Especially now, things are just getting so expensive. So Georgia, #1. Jessica, what were some of the other top states?
Yes, so following Georgia was actually New Hampshire. Then we had Utah, Vermont, and Minnesota. We were really surprised to see such regional diversity among our top 5, and pleasantly surprised by that, because, sometimes we might think some states are all going to be clustered together. And so it was definitely a nice surprise to see that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we don't want to get too negative here, but what were some of the states that were at the back of the list?
Of course, we have to mention the ones that technically ranked worst, but those states were Kentucky, Mississippi, Ohio, West Virginia, and Louisiana. And I want to note that, just because they ranked lower on the list doesn't mean these states are bad states. For example, Mississippi has the lowest cost of living in the U.S., but they also have the lowest median income. So while they may be very inexpensive to live in, your earnings are not necessarily going to be as great, which means there's not as much potential of growth for career.
Right. Right. Yeah, it just depends what you're looking for. Jessica Bryant with bestcolleges.com. Thank you. It's great to have you on.
Thank you.
And still ahead, stepping back but not resigning. CBN's founder and CEO honored on Fox News as Power Player of the Week. Finally tonight, stepping back but not retiring. CBN founder and CEO Pat Robertson transformed religious broadcasting. And after more than 6 decades, he is taking a bow from hosting the network's flagship show, The 700 Club. This weekend on Fox News Sunday, host Chris Wallace named Dr. Robertson his Power Player of the Week.
How certain are you that there's a heaven?
Chris, there is no doubt in my mind. When you see this huge universe, you know there's something more.
Amen. Well, Robertson says he is looking forward to heaven, but not too soon. At 91, he's planning to live to 120 and continue his work serving God's kingdom. And that is going to do it for Faith Nation. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.